you for joining us for today's Cherry Insect Pest Management webinar. My name is Janet Van Zorn. I'm the IPM specialist with the Lake Ontario Fruit Program. And so just to begin with, to familiarize everyone with how we use Zoom, if you kind of scroll your mouse down to the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little bar pop up and you'll see a chat icon and a question and answer icon. So the chat bar you can use to ask any technical issues. And I just posted something in there, so hopefully that will pop up. And then the question and answer bar is where you can type in any questions that you have for any of the speakers. And you can go ahead and type those in at any point during the presentations, and then we'll address those all at the end in the last few minutes of the presentation of the webinar today. But go ahead and type those in at any point. Before we get started today, I'd like to give a big thank you to today's sponsors. We have two sponsors today. Valent USA and Valent Biosciences are pleased to sponsor today's webinar and to offer several insecticides for use in cherries. Asana XL is an insecticide formulated to have superior UV stability, providing for extended residual activity. It's very effective against a broad range of pests, including plum and peach tree borers, cherry aphids, and cherry fruit fly. Zeal miticide offers long-lasting control of two-spotted spider mites and European red mites, working on all life stages of these pests. And Danitol is a broad-spectrum insecticide with a short 3-day PHI, making it an excellent choice for cherry fruit fly and spotted wing drosophila control. And you can learn more information about Valent products at valent.com. We are also lucky to be sponsored today by FMC. FMC offers multiple products to rotate between for effective spotted wing drosophila control. Growers often start off with Mustang Max at 4 ounces per acre. Mustang Max is a pyrethroid with a 14-day PHI. Nearer to harvest, they can switch to Exirel, which has a short 3-day PHI and a 12-hour REI. Exirel is a group 28 insecticide, providing a different mode of action than most other products on the market. And for more information about Exirel, I will put a link to their fact sheet in the chat bar in just a few minutes here that you can follow to learn a little bit more about their products or reach out and contact Gail. So I'd now like to start off with a very brief introduction to spotted wing drosophila in New York, and then I'll turn it over to Juliet Carroll to discuss their management. So a quick intro to spotted wing drosophila. This is an invasive pest that arrived in New York in 2011. It's now present in most of the United States, most all of New York, and most of the United States. It's a pest of soft-skinned fruit, and it's prevalent not only in many of the fruit crops that we grow in New York, such as raspberries and cherries, as well as other soft-skinned fruits, but also in the wild landscape matrix surrounding these crops. And this makes it especially difficult to manage. There's a number of reasons. Because it's in the surrounding matrix, it tends to, even if you have perfect control inside of your crop, it will quickly be migrating in from outside, from the honeysuckle or other buckthorn, other fruits that are growing in the landscape margin. The populations of spotted wing can ramp up really quickly. The females lay over 300 eggs during their lifetime. So you can imagine that the population can start off very low and quickly reach astronomical numbers. There's no native enemies, being an invasive pest from Asia, and so it, again, can quickly reach very high numbers. There's some suggestion that it may be outcompeted in situations where it's present with other of our native Drosophilas. Some of those are able to outcompete spotted wing, but the real advantage that spotted wing has is this serrated ovipositor that you can see. I think you can see my mouse, and you can see on the female here, she's able to saw into intact fruit and lay her eggs there, which is something that none of our native Drosophilas are able to do. And so in order to identify spotted wing, compared with all of the native fruit flies that are out there, again, with the female, it's this serrated ovipositor that's really the bomber characteristic that you'll recognize her with. And you'll see it's very dark and saw-like, and it, to me, it just looks scary, whereas the ovipositors on our native Drosophilas do not look scary. And then with the male, it has this spot on the wing. And it also, you can't see it very clearly in this picture, but it has one single mating comb, whereas most of our native fruit flies have 2 mating combs on their front leg. So those are the 2 characteristics to identify the male with. And the damage that it has, basically the fruit will sort of melt from the inside. So the larvae, the adult fly, will lay its eggs in the fruit. The larvae are feeding inside the fruit, and so you can see the cherries just sort of melt off the tree. The raspberry, you can see this maggot, the larva feeding inside of the raspberry. And in terms of phenology, I'd just like to point out really quickly here, this is information from the past 7 years, I think, of trapping spotted wing in New York. And you can see that overall the trend is that they're arriving a little bit earlier most years. There was maybe a little blip where they arrived a little later, but this year, again, we're seeing our first trap catch even a little bit earlier than in previous years. So they're kind of showing up a little bit earlier every year, which is a little terrifying. So that's the introduction that I have, and so I will now stop sharing, and Julie, if you're ready to go ahead and talk a little bit about what we can do about them.
Okay, great. Can everybody hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay.
You can share.
And I think I share first. And then I start my slide show, and hopefully you guys can see my slides. Can you see the big slide?
Yep, that's perfect.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to run through some information about what we know and have learned about spotted wing drosophila management in tart cherry. And let me get myself organized so that I can advance. All right, so this was the situation in 2017 where SWD infested tart and sweet cherry, and I don't know if you guys can recall the phenology or the sort of date of arrival slide that Janet just showed. In 2017, this insect arrived quite early in New York State. Numerous tart cherry blocks near Lake Ontario were infested by this insect, whereas in previous years it had not really been a problem. Loads were rejected by the processor because there is essentially zero tolerance for any white worms in tart cherries, and fruit was dumped. So this is the tart cherry crop, basically dumped on the ground in an orchard near Lake Ontario. So what I wanted to find out was whether the IPM approach that is being used in Michigan tart cherries would work in New York. This program involves monitoring for SWD, monitoring when fruit ripening is occurring, and if one SWD is caught and fruit is ripening or ripe, it is time to initiate your SWD spray program. I have also included in this program tailoring the insect spray program to keep SWD populations down, because we now know from the research which started in 2018 that SWD is arriving in these orchards when fruit is still green. So if the insecticide program for plum cucurleo and the cherry fruit fly, black cherry fruit fly, and if people are in the quarantine area, the European cherry fruit fly, the Ragalitis fruit flies, is tailored so that the choices are made for materials that are also effective against SWD, we can keep populations down. And I also wanted to understand why cherries were particularly at risk at that point in time in the Lake Ontario region, whereas in areas around Geneva, people were not having as severe a problem, or even orchards blocks that were further inland were not affected in 2017. So I wanted to know if there was a microclimate effect along Lake Ontario. So I'm not going to share all the results. The results in 2019 were really striking, and so I wanted to show these to you because they really show the difference between those sites that are near to the lake and those sites that are inland. So there was significantly earlier trap catch in the orchards within a mile of Lake Ontario compared to those that were even just 2 to 5 miles further inland. So you can see Early catch, May 21 and May 28. And indeed, this May 21 catch at both these orchards wasn't first catch because we didn't get zero catch there. As soon as I set the traps, I caught SWD. This column shows the number of SWD that were caught during that first trap catch date reflected in this column. Longer time intervals between trap catch and harvest are occurring in these orchards close to Lake Ontario because, as we know, the tree phenology is held back because they're closer to the lake. They don't bud out as early, the bloom is later, etc. And so severe pressure from SWD is basically occurring in these orchards, and it was so severe in 2019 that in this particular orchard, the IPM program failed. And I'll show you the spray records that I analyzed related to this. And it was interesting, in these inland sites, few to no SWD targeted sprays were actually needed. So here are the inland sites, and the dotted blue line is the trap catch data. The black arrow indicates an insecticide spray that was not known to be efficacious against SWD. The gold arrow are SWD effective materials that were applied in the orchard. And then this green dotted line indicates the harvest date. Here and here. So in these three inland orchards, you can see that SWD first catch didn't occur really until about the time frame we're in right now. Early July, end of June, early July. And so most of these sprays really were being targeted for plum cucurleo or European cherry fruit fly. And the interesting thing, as Janet pointed out, these populations can explode. And I want you to take a look at this July 22 trap catch data point. This orchard was harvested before July 22, and so traps came down on the 19th. Or, yeah, we pulled the traps on the 19th at that location. And even here, there was a rise in SWD populations. So in the lakeshore sites, what we have is SWD has arrived already. And so we're using these insecticides, all of which are efficacious against SWD, but are also going to keep plum cucurleo and European cherry fruit fly and potentially oblique-banded leaf roller, if you need to spray for that, down. Same type of thing here and here. So you can see the catch is hovering around 0 to 1 to 2 individuals caught each week. So these sprays are effectively keeping the population down despite the fact that the crop isn't susceptible to infestation because it's still green. It's not going to start coloring until, you know, about end of June, early July. But here's that July 22nd trap catch. So at one orchard, we went from like catching 1 or 2 flies to 250 the following week, 85 the following week, and 57 the following week. This particular pressure right here was just too much for this orchard. And this is the orchard where infestation. So this is what we're up against, people, and this is why we have to choose these insecticides wisely if our orchard blocks are adjacent to Lake Ontario. So there is a significant microclimate effect near Lake Ontario that delays crop ripening. Yeah, that's really great, right? From a pomology, horticulture point of view, reducing late spring frost issues. But in those same lake microclimates, SWD is arriving earlier and is building up to higher populations sooner. So the combination of these two factors places cherry orchards within a mile of Lake Ontario at extreme risk of SWD infestation. And I would argue that microclimate in general may play a significant role in this insect. So if you are near to bodies of water, whether they are rivers and things like that, it pays dividends to trap for this insect and to know if it's arriving so that you can adjust and tailor your insecticide program. This is just a picture to show you that cherry infested with SWD often has this unique characteristic that the emerging larvae will often pupate partway out of the cherry and just hang out there. And so you'll get these pupal casings left on the surface of the cherry. Yum, not so great. So basically, I feel that the IPM approach for dealing with SWD in cherries can and does work. But I think along with that, we need to tailor the insect spray program to keep SWD populations down prior to fruit ripening. There is evidence emerging nationwide that it is far better management with SWD to knock those populations down early with some of the more efficacious materials than it is to choose materials that might not be as effective against this insect. So choose Plumpca curleo, cherry fruit fly, black cherry fruit fly, and European cherry fruit fly insecticides wisely. And choose those that also have activity against SWD, especially if you're in a lake microclimate. And once fruit is ripening, you have to plan your SWD management strategy. So now I'm going to go over the SWD insecticide quick guides with you a wee bit. And as with any quick guide and anything that I seem to ever do, there are constantly revisions that need to be made. And so it was an oversight on my part to not include Baythroid XL. There is a 2EE for this material on SWD, and this has a reasonable pre-harvest interval of 7 days. The other thing that I want to point out is that Mustang Max recently received a special local needs label, reducing the pre-harvest interval to 3 days, from 14 days to 3 days. This makes it much better in terms of fitting in to protecting our fruit closer to harvest from this nasty insect. So look for this insecticide quick guide and also buy the Cornell pest management guidelines so that you can get the latest information on the insecticides that are effective against SWD. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cross-reference on this quick guide the materials that are also labeled for Plumpca curleo. I know that the time of concern for this insect has long passed, but I did want to bring this information to your attention. So there are 5 materials that are registered for use against Plumpca curleo that also offer excellent to good to excellent activity against SWD. So what are you going to do? You're going to look at the days to harvest and you're going to say, oh, you know, this one's 21 days. Maybe this is my material of choice for Plumpca curleo because that's going to be okay 21 days to harvest. And maybe this 14-day to harvest one. So you see what I'm saying? You're going to be planning your strategy to not only preserve materials for closer to harvest, but then the other key thing is to rotate among this IRAC group. So you don't want to use, these are the pyrethroids. You don't want to use pyrethroid after pyrethroid after pyrethroid. Mustang Max resistance has reared its ugly head in Drosophila melanogaster, our native fruit fly, in vineyards in Yates County. So it's a thing, okay? Resistance is a thing. And we need to protect our insecticide active ingredients by rotating. So now let's look at the Ragolitas fruit flies and the materials that are in common for Rhagoletis and spotted wing Drosophila. Baythroid is one. The entrust materials, these are organic approved. Very important to rotate these materials with another. Exarel, Verdeperin, Asana, and Imidan are all good choices for Rhagoletis fruit flies. But again, as we get closer to harvest, we're really going to be just looking at Exarel and Exarel. So that's kind of a bummer. All right, so when you plan your SWD management strategy, plan to preserve the lower PHIs for use close to harvest, rotate your active ingredients through to harvest for resistance management, choose insecticides for other arthropod pests in your cherry orchard that also have activity against SWD, especially if your orchard is close to Lake Ontario. Don't stretch spray intervals, 7-day max interval. Achieve thorough coverage in the orchard. Some of the research out of Michigan State University is showing that fruit in the upper part of the canopy can have greater infestation, and it may be due to UV degradation, rain wash off, or even coverage issues in that top of the canopy. If it rains and you can do it according to the label, reapply the insecticide. Obviously, read and follow label recommendations. And here are some cultural practices to consider. Mow the row middles. SWD likes humid, moist conditions. Any way we can open up the agro-ecosystem of our orchards to higher solar radiation, higher temperatures, and lower humidity, we are going to make it unpalatable or not as attractive to SWD. And prune to open the canopy. And then I'll just end here with some resources for you. This one's easy, fruit.cornell.edu/spotted-wing has management. This is where the insecticide quick guides are kept, a list of hosts. Janet alluded to weeds and woody hosts that inhabit the wooded edges around your orchards. I post trap catch information from our New York statewide network of traps on an SWD blog, so you can subscribe to this blog, blogs.cornell.edu/SWD1. And then if you want to know where your cooperative extension people are and how to get a hold of them, I have a list of that on the NYSIPM website. And that is my last slide. So I am now going to hand it over to Art Agnello, who is going to talk to you about managing the cherry fruit flies, the Rhagoletis species, in your orchard. And I will stop sharing. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Julie. I just want to remind everyone while Art is getting his screen sharing going on that if you have any questions at any point here, just go ahead and put those in that question and answer bar that you should see at the bottom of your screen. So Art, yep, there we go.
Are you muted, Art?
Yeah, I just had to find the proper box. It gets tricky when you're a panel member. All the boxes disappear. Okay, thanks very much, Janet. Good to be with you today. Talking about cherry fruit fly management and an update on that in the midst of this cherry harvest season or soon upon us. So in New York, as you probably know, there are 2 native species of taphritid fruit flies that occur together and that attack cherries. And as you can tell, these are closely related to apple maggot, which is in the same genus. So we have the cherry fruit fly, sometimes called the eastern cherry fruit fly to distinguish it from a western North American species. That's the major species, Rhagoletis cingulata. And then we have the black cherry fruit fly, Rhagoletis fausta, which is of lesser importance. Here we go. Lesser importance, and mostly infest wild cherries or bird cherries. And you can see that the cherry fruit fly has a pattern of bands on its wings that look very similar to apple maggot. And the black cherry fruit fly has this little donut hole in the wing pattern at the back portion of the wing. So both of these species are univoltine, just like the apple maggot. That means that there's only one generation per year. They begin to emerge anywhere from late May to early June, about the time early tart cherry varieties start to show some color. Black cherry fruit fly always emerges first around the time of petal fall, and then cherry fruit fly follows about a week later. And so both of them continue to emerge into early July. Now, it is possible to monitor for these flies using fluorescent yellow board traps that incorporate a bait like ammonium acetate or ammonium carbonate. For the greatest usefulness, these are generally hung near an abandoned block just to establish the time of the first adult emergence. The adults don't begin laying eggs immediately, but rather feed for about a week before they mate and then start searching for fruit to oviposit in. Now, as I say, this is technically something that can be done by growers and consultants, primarily to time the first preventive sprays, but in practical terms, it's usually not worth the effort since there's a zero tolerance for infested fruit, as Julie was mentioning, and also most growers have already begun a protective schedule for plum curculio and or spotted winged drosophila. So the spray window for these flies usually just proceeds from that. As for damage, you're no doubt familiar with the type of damage they do, piercing the skin with their ovipositor to lay single eggs just below the surface. When the larvae hatch, they tunnel in the fruit as they feed, and this causes the pulp to separate from the pit and turn brown. After 2 to 3 weeks, the maggot is fully grown, and so then it bores a hole through the skin to drop to the ground and pupate. Now, as noted here, a program of 2 to 3 preventive sprays is recommended, which corresponds to about 1 week after the first emergence in an abandoned planting. And there are a number of good control options, including imidan in tart cherries only, lorsban, several pyrethroids, Sale, 7 delegate, and Xarel. Entrust is also an option, often elected for organic production, but perhaps somewhat less effective than the others. Additionally, we now have another species in our region, the European cherry fruit fly, Rhagoletis ceracea, also a member of this genus. And you can see that it has a little yellow half-moon segment on its thorax. Plus, if you look closely, you'll see a little truncated band coming off of the front edge of the wing. And then below, for comparison, you can note the wing patterns of our native species, indicating also the donut hole for the black cherry fruit fly wing. Now, this species is invasive. It's native to mainland Europe and is now found throughout the Middle East and into Central Asia. It was first found in Canada, Ontario, Canada, in 2015, and then across the Niagara River into Western New York a couple years later. This is the most important pest of sweet cherries in Europe, and additionally attacks tart cherries, wild black cherries, and also Lonicera, which is the genus that contains the honeysuckles. There are several species of Lonicera in many which are present and wide in the New York, Ontario region. And this is where most adults of this species have been found so far, that is in stands of honeysuckle. Like our native species, the adults of European cherry fruit fly live from 4 to 7 weeks and wait between 1 and 2 weeks after emerging to begin laying eggs. They prefer fruits that are in full sun, that is, those that have southern or southeastern exposure, and usually about the time that they're changing from green to yellow. This is often when the fruit has a hardened pit and about 2/10 of an inch of pulp. They also lay their eggs singly, individually in the fruit, and a single female can produce up to 200 eggs, although usually this number is between 50 and 80. Now, the adults don't fly very far when searching for hosts, usually than 100 yards, and rarely more than 4/10 of a mile, except when hosts are scarce. Although this probably doesn't happen too frequently in Western New York, considering how abundant honeysuckle is in the area. One important fact to note is that this species may emerge 1 to 2 weeks earlier than our native cherry fruit flies, which would be important if the block is not already being sprayed for plum curculio or SWD. Now, there is a quarantine in place for this pest, and I don't really need to get into the fine details too much, but here are the main points. The quarantine area, which is a cooperative agreement between New York Department of Ag and Markets and USDA, APHIS, comprises all of Niagara, Orleans, and Erie counties. Fresh cherries from this area may be sold outside of it if growers are following a systems approach for management. Now, this means that certified sprays of approved pesticides are being used, and I'll get to those in a minute, and they need to have been started 30 days before harvest with regular reapplications every 6 to 10 days until the PHI. Each cherry orchard block needs to have at least one trap for this species deployed in it, with a minimum of 2 traps in blocks that are 5 acres or greater in size. These traps are to be set, collected, and maintained weekly by New York State Department of Ag and Markets, and I'll give you the contact information for them if you need it. You are allowed to sell fruit from this block, provided no more than 1 European cherry fruit fly adult has been captured on the trap in that block during the season. So you're given 1 as a freebie. If 2 or more flies have been captured, you can't sell the fresh fruit outside the quarantine area. A certified spray program is not required if you're selling the fruit to an approved processing facility, perhaps, for instance, one in Pennsylvania, and this would require a signed compliance agreement plus a permit that is obtainable through Ag and Markets. Now, no cherries, fresh cherries, may be moved into designated restricted areas. So in New York, this means Chautauqua County, Columbia, Schuyler, Ulster, and Wayne counties. And additionally, states to the west, including California, Idaho, Michigan, Montana, Oregon, Utah, and Washington, most of which I'm sure are not generally destinations for your fruit, but that's the restricted areas. Now, for information on this quarantine program, you should be contacting Margaret Kelly at the New York State Department of Ag and Markets, and here is her phone and email, and this will be available when this presentation additionally is posted on the Lake Ontario Fruit Program website. Now, the main points I want you to take away from this topic is that first, European cherry fruit fly flight has begun, and adults have been caught in the quarantine area. Now, secondly, similarly to SWD, you can refer to a quick guide of insecticides acceptable for the systems approach in New York, which was put together by Janet, Julie, and myself. This guide provides cross-references to all the products for the Ragelitas species and additionally SWD, and it's available on the Lake Ontario Fruit Program website. Here's what it looks like, so similar to the SWD quick guide, and so you can go to the LOF website and download a copy. Okay, and as Julie noted, we've had some recent registration activity from DEC. The Mustang Max insecticide, zeta-zypermethrin, has recently, I think within the last week, been granted a FIFRA 24C special local need label with a decreased pre-harvest interval of 3 days, reduced down from 14 to control SWD and European cherry fruit fly in New York cherries. And so you can find that label on the DEC pesticide portal website, and that information needs to be in possession of the user at the time of pesticide application. And just finally, in addition to the resources that Julie pointed out, I would just reiterate, if you hadn't heard already, that there is a good publication on stone fruit IPM available from Great Lakes Fruit Workers, which contains a series of fact sheets on important diseases and insect pests, including cherry fruit flies and SWD. So I believe that's it for my presentation. So I can return the controls back over to Janet.
All right, great. Thank you, Art. So we now have plenty of time left over for questions and answers. If anybody has any, you can either, I think you can raise your hand possibly, and I can allow you to speak, or you can otherwise just type it into the question and answer. We had a couple questions come in that Julie answered online, but maybe we can, until anybody else has other questions, we can just sort of discuss those really briefly. Also, oh, there is actually a hand up already. So Jim Bittner, I think I've unmuted you.
I had to unmute. I guess I'm unmuted. A question about extrol compared to the pyrethroids. I mean, traditionally, your pyrethroids don't last very long on the trees. They're broken down by UV light pretty quick. Is extrol a little longer lasting, or are they really in a similar situation?
You're talking about effectiveness against SWD or Regalitis, or?
I guess Regalitis more than SWD, but both of them really.
Yeah, I mean, I think XRL, I think it tends to be a little more effective just because it is more long-lasting. Doesn't break down, photodegrade quite as quickly as the pyrethroids. So yeah, that's just sort of the general assumption. There are very variable factors to take into account also, just depending on the specific AI and the formulations of some of these pyrethroids.
I guess the other question is a sale. A sale is supposed to be pretty good. We hope is pretty good against European cherry fruit fly. What about spotted wing drosophila?
Yeah, I'm going to defer to Julie on that because I haven't done as much work on efficacy of materials against SWD.
I'm going to unmute myself. There's somebody mowing the lawn right outside my window, so I hope that doesn't affect you guys being able to hear me. A sale, what I'm looking for whether or not it's registered for use on other berry crops, because it doesn't make the list for any of the tree fruit.
I think I can at least offer a partial
Yes.
answer here really quickly. I believe that based on information, I think it was from Michigan State possibly, and I'm not sure if it's registered there or if they were doing a research trial, but I believe that they found it to be relatively poor.
Yeah, so it is registered against SWD on blueberry, but it only gets a good rating. And the recommendation is to add sugar as a feeding stimulant to get the insect to ingest it. And that is the same on brambles and strawberries. So I would not be relying on a sale to keep SWD under control. The tart cherry grower who was unable to harvest in 2019, remember that spike in trap catch numbers up to about 250? They had actually applied Delegate that That was like their last spray for SWD. And delegates' activity against SWD is only moderate. It's not an excellent material. And so, if SWD is your primary concern, make sure that you choose materials that are going to do the job and do it well.
And I don't have the sale label up right at the moment, but looking at the pest management guidelines, it is not on the list of spotted wing drosophila materials for tart cherries, so I don't believe it's labeled for that pest in cherries.
It is not.
Right.
Nor on any other tree fruit. It is labeled on grapes, but again, even in grapes, it's just really being given a good rating.
So we have a question coming into the question and answer bar, which is whether they have found European cherry fruit fly in cherry fruit, or was it simply trapped in one of the orchards or nearby?
My understanding is they have only ever caught the insect in traps. Being able to rear European cherry fruit fly out of fruit is fraught with difficulty, because you would be moving infested fruit to a laboratory facility, let's say, that might be outside the quarantine area. So that was nixed. So the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets did a limited survey of fruit. And I don't believe, and this was last year, I don't believe they've found it in cherry fruit that was collected. Art, do you know anything more about that rearing study last year?
No, I was not. Nobody told me that they found it in cherry fruits. So they have trapped it in the past in cherry orchards.
Yeah,
But
I think that's it.
But nobody's reported to me that they really got it coming out of cherry fruits.
Yeah, that was my impression also. These comments are coming, by the way, I don't know if you guys are watching the question and answer bar, but these are coming from Wendy McFadden Smith. I hope I'm saying that right, from Ontario.
You are pronouncing that correctly.
Excellent. And she's also said that they've only caught them in wild areas, not even in cherry orchards. Incubated fruit didn't get any European cherry fruit fly. And that according to kind of her impression, the cherry fruit fly sprays routinely applied are controlling European cherry fruit fly in Ontario. I don't know if you guys want to respond to that in any way, but that is an interesting perspective, and thank you for those comments, Wendy.
Yeah, that's helpful to know that.
She also asks, Julie, were your spotted-wing Drosophila grafts total counts per site or average counts per site?
They were total counts per site. So there are only 2 traps that are set in these orchard blocks, one in the interior of the block and the other on the edge.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
it's total counts. So if you took the average, that would be 125 per trap in that big surge.
Okay, perfect. So any other questions, feel free to let us know. Going back to some of the questions that you answered online, Julie, there's a question about chilling fruit to 32 degrees. Would that kill spotted-wing Drosophila larvae? And I actually wanted to kind of follow up on that. Would 32, do you get the impression that's cold enough to actually kill the larvae, or is that just sort of slowing them down, and then as soon as they're brought out of cold storage, would they continue to develop? I guess the question being sort of like, if you were storing fruit and then selling it, somebody puts it out on the table for 5 days, is that still going to end up with maggoty fruit, or would that actually slow them down to a point where they're not going to return to developing? Does that make sense?
So, you know, the research that's been done on this, and typically scientists, they'll look at a lethal dose 50. So that's often what they're looking at least as a benchmark. But I think that is what should be indicated to growers as a cautionary note. It's going to slow eggs and larvae down and potentially also kill them. I know that raspberries and blueberries can tolerate down to 32 degrees Fahrenheit cold storage. Most people are going to be running their cold storage at probably 33 or 34 degrees Fahrenheit. I know that Dr. Farouk Zaman is still on the call. He works in Suffolk County Cornell Cooperative Extension on Long Island, and Farouk has done some work on cold storage. I don't know if you would be able to unmute Farouk and we could get some comments from his perspective on cold temperature treatment and storage.
Hi, Julie, it's Farouk. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Great.
Yes, I'm unmuted. Yes, I think we did it back in 2013 or 14. So we put some infested raspberries in cold temperatures. So we did it with the raspberries, so not with the blueberries. And we found like actually in 37 degree Fahrenheit and below, they don't develop. And then to 39 degree Fahrenheit, they like the egg actually hatch and then little bit development. It's a long time to develop. And then below 35, most of the eggs actually never hatched out. Even the larvae, they were not survived into the pupation. So below 37 is very good. Up to 39, it will delay the development. So that was my finding, if I recall that.
Excellent. Thank you, Farouk.
But I never put those temperature down 32 because I was thinking that maybe that too cold for the fruits. But as I just heard from you, like that raspberry or blueberries can tolerate up to 32 degree Fahrenheit. So that will be even better if they can.
Yeah,
keep
I
in
was
that.
surprised at that. The Berry Group had a webinar with cold storage specialist, I believe, either at the University of Vermont or University of New Hampshire, and that it came right out of their information. I think it would be really tricky to hold cold storage at 32 because obviously there's going to be variability, but it's really good to know that your target really needs to be below 37. And
Yeah,
I don't know really anything about the temperatures that cherries will tolerate in cold storage. If somebody among the group and in the audience knows, perhaps they could raise their hand and let us know or type it into the chat.
Yeah, great, thank you. So we do have another question came in, just sort of asking for some clarification about where exactly European cherry fruit fly has been trapped by the Department of Ag and Markets so far this year. Was that in commercial orchards? How many? That type of thing. I don't know who wants to take that question.
I haven't been getting any updates from Ag and Markets on their trapping status. So I passed along the information that Julie gave me that it has been trapped in the quarantine area someplace, but I don't know where.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking that up right now in my email. So maybe take another question while I look that up.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Julie. There is another question here, varietal differences in susceptibility to either spotted-winged drosophila or European cherry fruit fly. I guess between, I don't know if that's specifically referring to tarts or sweets or both of the above. I can say that from a research project, a very limited research project that I was part of back in Wisconsin, that the only variety of tart cherry that we found to be resistant to spotted-winged drosophila was also resistant to my own personal palate. I thought it tasted terrible, but I'm not sure about anything broader than that. I don't know if Art or Julie have any other thoughts on that one.
No, I've never heard of any varietal differences. Certainly not for European cherry fruit fly. I think they're all they're all susceptible to some degree. So I see Jim Bittner says there's much difference between tarts and sweets. I don't know for which one. Maybe a spotted wing.
Well, I guess that was my question. I should have worded it better. Is there much difference between sweets and tarts? I don't know.
I have to also plead ignorance on that. I just don't know.
Typically, the thing that drives susceptibility to spotted wing drosophila is test pressure. I know that they use that in plums, and there's like a certain pressure test below which they know that the plums are going to be susceptible. So I think that might be something to look at between sweet cherry and tart cherry. I mean, tart cherries are so seemingly delicate. I would think that they would potentially be softer in general than a sweet cherry fruit, but Jim, you're going to be better at answering that than I am.
That feeling, Julie, is to agree with you on that tarts are more susceptible, and again, simply because anything with a softer skin, it seems like, is more susceptible to spotted wing.
But the acidity of the fruit can also make a difference. So that whether, if there's too much acid, maybe the larvae don't develop as well and not as many go on to become adults, but I don't know enough about the chemistry between sweet and tart cherries. The other thing that I just wanted to mention is that there is a material that Esther Kibbe is testing in blueberry that can be applied that will toughen the skin, and it will make the fruit less prone to cracking. And so what she is doing is she is using it to see if there's a difference in the susceptibility of the blueberries to SWD. So that, again, I think underscores the answer Janet gave initially, that it's the toughness of the skin or the thickness of the skin that would make a difference.
Yes. Do you want to go ahead, Julie, with anything, or?
Yeah, I found this email from Ag and Markets. So they have, and I also don't get all their trap catch data. So we don't typically get those data. That's where contacting Margaret Kelly to find out the answer to that would be useful. European cherry fruit fly has been found in traps in unsprayed areas, but they don't say whether it is an unsprayed orchard, let's say an abandoned orchard, or an unsprayed hedgerow where there's honeysuckle. And that was as of June 22nd, so about a week ago exactly.
Sounds good, thank you. Yeah, so we'll be we're recording this webinar and we'll get it up as soon as possible, hopefully on Wednesday or Thursday at the latest. And when we do that, we'll try to get a little bit more information about exactly where what landscape those European cherry fruit flies were trapped in, and put that in the notes of that webinar. We'll also send that out in some of our publications, or maybe Julie, would you put that on the Spotted Wing blog, or is that?
Sure, I can. Let's coordinate that and make sure that we do the best job we can, because I can update the blog announcing this meeting and put the link to the recording and everything right in there, so it's all in one place. And that may be really useful.
Yeah, so stay tuned, and we'll try to get a little bit better answer to that question once we get some more information.
So Wendy asks, is it effective to spray fruit on the ground for either spotted wing drosophila or the tephritid fruit flies, the Ragolitas species? I'm going to address spotted wing drosophila, and I'm just going to maybe prime the conversation for the tephritid fruit flies and say that those larvae drop to the ground from the fruit and they go down into the soil. So I don't think you would get much benefit from spraying fruit on the ground. However, SWD could potentially be infesting that fruit that's left on the ground or be in the fruit that has fallen to the ground. And other drosophilids will infest that fruit as well. And so there are insecticides too, basically, that are labeled for post-harvest orchard floor treatment of drops. Asana XL has a 2EE for this purpose. And I have an insecticide quick guide on the SWD management page on labeled insecticides for treating dropped fruit. And that Asana label is for dropped apples, pear, and stone fruit. So pretty much the pome and stone fruit that we grow in New York. For berries, treating fruit on the ground, under plants, fallen berries, which is really more akin to what I think Wendy is asking. The material labeled on blueberry and raspberries, blackberries is Danitol, 2.4 EC. So there are a couple materials registered for that. There used to be another material that could be used for literally cull piles, because Greg Loeb, the berry entomologist, often would find first catch of SWD near a large pile of pumice behind a juice plant. So you know, that certainly is a resource for SWD.
That's great. Thank you. Art, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, not really. I mean, I think Julie addressed the fritted fruit flies. It's really not a useful tactic against that group of pests. So they're just not in the fruits on the ground. And particularly, you're not going to affect, even if there were, you're not going to affect the this season's crop, because by the time they're on the ground, you know, they're ready to pupate, and they wouldn't be back into the orchard until next season. So unlike SWD, which have multiple generations.
Yeah, slower generation period. Okay, I guess we're almost out of time, and we also have no open questions at the moment. So unless anybody else wants to real quick type in a question or raise their hand, we'll kind of start wrapping it up here. So I just want to reiterate, we're going to get this recording online as quickly as possible. We'll put it on the LOF, the Lake Ontario Fruit website. We'll also put it on New York State IPM and the blog, Julie's blog. So we will get this out to you as quickly as possible. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to myself, to Julie, or to Art. All of our information, hopefully you already have it, but if not, it's all online. So any questions, feel free to reach out to us at any point.
Jim Bittner still has a hand raised. I don't know if that means he has another quick question. We've got 2 more minutes.
We were answered. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Jim. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Janet, for hosting this.
Yeah, thanks, Janet, and the Lake Ontario Fruit team.
Great. All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye now.